Last time I sipped that.
What's the deal, man? We back with another video, man. RizzoLu in the motherfucking building. Brr! Got my nigga Young Chriz in the building.
What's happening?
We about to react to this video real quick. By disturbing. This case is terrifying.
Let's get into it.
Please subscribe. This case takes place in the USA in the year 1982. John David Gosch, known as Johnny, was 12 years old at the time when he went missing from his family's neighborhood in Iowa. He lived at home with his parents, John and Noreen Gosch, and he was their youngest child. In 1982, he was a 7th grade student, described by those who knew him as a friendly boy. He played on a junior football team and practiced karate. Johnny also had a strong sense of independence and a sense of responsibility far beyond his years. He took on a part-time job as a paperboy, delivering newspapers each morning in his suburban neighborhood. By the summer of '82, Johnny had been working that paper route for nearly a whole year and was regarded as a reliable paperboy by his route manager. In fact, he had just recently won a sales contest for new subscriptions, earning him a prize of an airplane ride over his hometown. He was also known as a thoughtful son. Some sources say that with his earnings, Johnny would occasionally purchase a single rose to bring home to his mother as a small token of affection. Because Johnny's paper route required him lugging heavy bundles of Sunday papers, his parents typically set a rule that an adult should accompany him on the early rounds. On weekdays, Johnny usually delivered papers after school, but on Sundays, he and his father would go out together before dawn to ensure the large Sunday editions reached customers on time. But Johnny didn't always like the adult supervision. Despite his young age, Johnny often insisted that he could handle the early morning paper deliveries all by himself, and he wanted to prove that he was old enough to do it alone.
I think I did see this one.
On the Friday night before he disappeared, Johnny had a small encounter that later struck his mother as rather strange. The Gosch family had attended a local high school football game on the 3rd of September 1982. During the game, Johnny went to go and buy popcorn, but he didn't return right away. After a few minutes, his father went looking for him, and he found Johnny under the stadium seats in conversation with a non-uniformed police officer. The officer had apparently called Johnny to come and speak with him alone. When Johnny's parents questioned him as to why he did this, Johnny replied by saying, "He was a policeman, don't you have to do what he says?" The mother found it strange that an officer would engage her 12-year-old son in private for a chat with no clear reason. At the time, the family did not pursue this matter any further. That Labor Day weekend, Johnny was focused on his paper route duties, and on the 5th of September, he had the Sunday edition to deliver in the early hours of the morning. Johnny woke up before dawn, as he had done many times before, to start the route. Although Johnny would usually wake up his father to go with him on his Sunday rounds, on this particular morning, Johnny decided to head out by himself. At about 5:45 a.m., whilst the rest of his family slept, Johnny quietly slipped out of the house with his red Radio Flyer pull-along wagon and the family's miniature dachshund called Gretchen. Johnny's destination was the paper drop-off point 2 blocks from his home, located near a local United Methodist church. This was the corner where the delivery truck would leave bundles of newspapers for the neighborhood carriers to pick up. Johnny walked the short distance to the drop-off site. Other paperboys from the area were also arriving to collect their papers around the same time. Among them was a 15-year-old friend of Johnny's called Mike, who also had a route in the area. The two boys chatted briefly as they waited for the truck, which arrived and unloaded the newspapers shortly after 6 a.m. Johnny and Mike helped each other load their respective bundles into their wagons. As they did, a man in a car pulled up alongside the curb near the drop-off point. Mike later said that this vehicle was a 2-toned Ford Fairmont and that the driver was a stocky middle-aged man. This man asked Johnny for directions to a local street. This man's presence struck the boys as a little bit strange, given that it was the early hours of the morning. Johnny had a brief conversation with this stranger through the car window, telling him how to find the street that he was looking for. After the man drove away, he went and spoke to Mike again. He said that something about this man and the whole situation the man was in was strange, and it made him want to get his route started right away. After loading his newspapers, Johnny told his friends that he was going to begin delivering and that he would catch up with them later on. He set off pulling his wagon, with Gretchen trotting alongside him. The other paper boys finished up at the drop site and went their separate ways. No one realized that within minutes, something dire was about to happen along Johnny's paper route. Just moments after Johnny left the paper drop-off site, several witnesses noticed an unfamiliar man following a short distance behind him. One witness, who was awake in the neighborhood that morning, was a 42-year-old local attorney named John Rossi. This John Rossi said that the original man in the car drove around the block and stopped again to ask Johnny for directions again, as if still confused about where to go. Sensing that the encounter was strange, John tried to note the car's license plate number as the conversation wrapped up and the car prepared to leave. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember the full license plate. The mysterious man in the Ford car eventually drove off and Johnny continued on his route. But as he proceeded down the street, another neighbor heard something alarming. A nearby resident was still in bed when he heard the slam of a car door followed by the roar of a car engine at roughly 6:15 a.m. When this neighbor looked out of the window, they saw a Ford Fairmont speeding away northbound, driving erratically away from the area where Johnny's trolley would soon be found. Following this, Johnny's faithful dachshund Gretchen wandered back to the Gosh family home by herself. And at around 7 a.m., customers on Johnny's route began to notice that their Sunday newspaper had not yet arrived. This was very much unlike Johnny, and his parents realized that something was terribly wrong. Johnny's father threw on some clothing and went out to look for his son along the route, retracing the usual path where Johnny would have been delivering the papers. Not far from their home, he made a grim discovery. He found Johnny's red trolley abandoned on the side street. Scattered nearby on the ground were some rubber bands that Johnny would have used to wrap the papers. There was no signs of Johnny himself. The father realized at once that his son had very likely been snatched off the street. He hurried back home with devastating news. The mother then called the police department at approximately 8:30 a.m. to report that her son was missing and that he may have been abducted. Officers were soon dispatched to the scene, and the first patrolman arrived within the hour to begin the investigation. In those frantic moments, neighbors joined the search, fanning out to scour the area for any trace of Johnny. But aside from the abandoned wagon and the few witness recollections of a man in the car, there were no immediate clues. No blood, no torn clothing, and no cries for help reported by anyone. Johnny seemed to have just vanished without a trace in an instant. The investigation was well underway, but according to Johnny's mother Nori, she recalled that it took approximately 45 minutes after her 911 call for an officer to show up at the scene. She found this to be incredibly frustrating. They also treated Johnny's disappearance as a missing child case, and they hesitated to classify it as an abduction on day one. With no body and no immediate ransom demanded, some officers initially wondered if Johnny might have run away or simply gotten lost, an assumption that infuriated his parents. And so, Johnny's mother and father took steps on their own. Within hours after Johnny's disappearance, they organized friends, neighbors, and local volunteers to start searching parks, fields, and hiding places around the area. Dozens of people joined in on the search. The police participated in these searches to some extent, but despite these extensive efforts on foot, no trace of Johnny was found that day. As hours turned to days, the police department began to take the case more seriously. Soon enough, authorities officially publicly acknowledged that foul play was likely involved. The classification of Johnny's case was changed from missing person to probable kidnapping, and the FBI was notified to assist. Investigators started piecing together witness statements. They compiled a description of the man seen talking to Johnny, the stocky, middle-aged man driving a two-toned blue Ford Fairmont. A composite sketch of the suspect and an alert about the vehicle were circulated regionally, but without a license plate number or name, the trail was limited. The attorney who saw the vehicle underwent hypnosis to recall the license plate number. This was partially successful. The plate that John Rossi recalled under hypnosis were followed up on. The police checked records for matching plates from Warren County. It seemed promising, but this lead did not point to any obvious suspects. There were no local residents who owned that car and matched the description, raising the possibility that the vehicle and suspect might have come from outside the immediate community. The case soon drew intensive media coverage in Iowa and beyond. By mid-September of 1982, local law enforcement was looking through tips from across the state as people phoned in with any sightings of a boy that matched Johnny's description. One of the earliest and most tantalizing tips came about a few months after Johnny vanished, when a woman in Oklahoma reported a possible sighting. In March of 1983, this witness told police that she had been approached by a distressed boy who shouted for help before two men pulled him away. The boy allegedly cried out, "I'm Johnny Gosh," as he was being dragged away. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, the people involved were gone. This gave the family some hope that Johnny might still be alive, but also anguish at the thought of him being moved from place to place by his captors. Numerous other leads then trickled in. Witnesses in other states claimed to have seen a boy resembling Johnny in the company of suspicious adults. But again, none of these sightings could be substantiated. Investigators followed each claim, sometimes even traveling out of state to chase down rumors, but every promising lead eventually hit a dead end. As the case dragged on into 1983, the lack of any solid evidence or suspects became deeply frustrating. The police had not named any person of interest publicly. There was simply no one identifiable to accuse. And then, in 1984, it happened again. On the 12th of August 1984, another young paperboy, 13-year-old Eugene Martin, disappeared under eerily similar circumstances while delivering the Des Moines Sunday Register on the south side of the city. This was 2 years after Johnny's abduction. Eugene went missing during the early morning hours on his paper route, and once again, there were no witnesses to the actual crime. The parallels between these two cases were unmistakable and raised fears of a serial child abductor at large. Johnny's mother immediately suspected that the same perpetrator was responsible, both for her son and Eugene. The national media took notice of the pattern. In an unprecedented move at the time, photographs of Johnny and Eugene were featured side by side on milk cartons. They were among the first children in U.S. history to have their missing person cases publicized on milk carton photographs. This was a practice that would soon become a cultural phenomenon in the fight to locate missing kids. Despite this heightened awareness and hundreds of new tips that poured in after Eugene's disappearance, investigators were unable to find concrete evidence linking the two cases. And then, in March of 1986, a third boy, also from Des Moines, vanished. 13-year-old Mark Allen. Although Mark disappeared from home at night and was not a paperboy, the media initially lumped Mark's case with Johnny's and Eugene's as a possible trio of related kidnappings. However, detectives could not establish a common thread of suspects among the three incidents. After exhaustive efforts, the official conclusion was that no definitive link could be proven between Mark, Eugene, and Johnny. They may have been coincidental or copycat crimes, or they may have been connected in ways that police could not substantiate at the time. But, with no perpetrators identified, the truth was unknown. Meanwhile, Johnny's family refused to let the case fade away. Over the years, his mother and father have hired several private investigators to continue the search where official efforts have let off. Among these were well-known figures like retired New York City detective Jim Rothstein and former FBI LA Bureau Chief Ted Gunderson. Both men took an interest in Johnny's case, and they offered their expertise. In 1985, a strange twist occurred when Johnny's family fell in Johnny's case. Bureau Chief Ted Gunderson. Both men took an interest.
What number it ain't even on there. Oh yeah. Oh, you on some wild shit. You on they be saying when it's in another city. Star
Welcome
11.
to Verizon Wireless. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial.
Out of there.
In Johnny's case, and they offered their expertise. In 1985, a strange twist occurred when Johnny's family fell victim to a cruel hoax. A 19-year-old man from Michigan named Robert Herman Meyer II contacted the family claiming to have information about Johnny. Writing under an alias, Robert alleged that he was a guard for a motorcycle gang that had kidnapped Johnny and the other boy, and that the two had been sold into a child slavery ring. He offered to return Johnny in exchange for ransom money. First, he requested $10,000, which Johnny's family paid, but then he demanded $100,000 more. The FBI soon became involved, and they tracked down Robert's communications. In an undercover operation, Robert was caught at the US-Canada border and arrested. He eventually confessed that his story was fabricated and that he had no actual ties to Johnny's disappearance. Robert was charged with fraud. This incident was a painful setback. Despite exhaustive investigations, task force meetings, and even segments on national programs like America's Most Wanted, the identity of Johnny's kidnappers remained elusive. By the late 80s, the active investigation had largely wound down, though the case was never officially closed. Police admitted that the evidence they gathered had been minimal. There was nothing solid enough to charge a suspect. In the absence of an official conclusion, numerous theories have emerged over the years to explain what happened to Johnny. The most prominent theory is his mother's. Noreen thinks that he was abducted by a sophisticated PDF file ring engaged in child trafficking. From early on, Johnny's mother Noreen publicly rejected the idea that her son was taken by a lone, opportunistic kidnapper. Instead, she became convinced that Johnny was targeted and sold into the dark world of trafficking. This belief was fueled by various pieces of information that she gathered through private investigators and self-run inquiries. Supporting the trafficking theory were a few unusual developments. In 1989, a 21-year-old prisoner in Nebraska named Paul Bonaccini came forward with a shocking claim. He alleged that he had been forced as a teenager to participate in Johnny's abduction as part of a trafficking ring. Paul was a convicted sex offender with known mental health issues. He provided detailed testimony to his attorney and later to a judge, describing how a powerful group had kidnapped children and sold them. According to Paul, Johnny was taken into this network and transported across state lines. He was subjected to horrific things and controlled by high-profile individuals. Paul even identified specific people that he claimed were ringleaders. Noreen met with Paul and found his account credible, noting that he even knew distinguishing features about Johnny that had not been made to the public. For example, details of a birthmark and a scar. However, law enforcement has officially cast doubt on Paul's story. The FBI and local police investigated his claims, but ultimately they did not find any evidence to verify them. Paul's own sibling even claimed that Paul was in Omaha at the time that Johnny was taken. No charges were filed based on Paul's statements, but his testimony later became part of numerous books and documentaries exploring the possibility of a nationwide child exploitation ring connected to the case. Another event that intensified the trafficking theory occurred 15 years after Johnny disappeared. In 1997, Johnny's mother publicly announced that Johnny had paid her a secret visit in the middle of the night. According to the mother, a 27-year-old Johnny showed up at her apartment front door at 2:30 a.m. one night in March of 1997. She claimed that Johnny was accompanied by a man that she didn't know. She said he confirmed that he was indeed alive, but had been held captive in a ring for many years. She said that Johnny had told her that he had finally escaped, but he remained in great danger. He was now living under a new identity and could not permanently return home. Apparently, this was to protect himself and his family from reprisals. Noreen claimed that the emotional reunion lasted only a brief time and that Johnny left again, urging her not to tell anyone for a while. Johnny's father has expressed doubt about the visit, stating publicly that he was not sure it ever actually happened. The police were informed of Noreen's claim, but without any proof, they could not verify it. The man claiming to be Johnny might have been an imposter preying on a grieving mother's hope. Noreen, however, insists that it was truly her son and that he briefly came out of hiding to see her. Additional fuel was added to these theories in 2006, when out of nowhere, Noreen received a package at her home that contained several disturbing photographs. The images showed 3 boys, bound and gagged, looking terrified. In one black and white photo, a boy about Johnny's age in the early 80s is gagged and tied up, with a brand mark visible on his shoulder. Noreen believed that this particular boy in the photograph was Johnny. She turned the photographs over to law enforcement for analysis. The police stated that they had traced some of the images to a case in Florida and determined that those were unrelated pictures of abuse from a past investigation. However, one of the photographs could not be conclusively identified, and it may have been legitimate. To this day, the origin of that image is not fully explained. Johnny's mother views the anonymous delivery of the photographs as a form of proof, or at least a hint, that Johnny was indeed trafficked. The police, on the other hand, cautioned that there is no confirmation that the boy in the photograph is Johnny, and noted that cruel pranks or internet hoaxes could be at play. Aside from the trafficking, there are some simpler theories. Some investigators and journalists believe that Johnny may have been victim to an opportunistic offender unrelated to a larger ring. But for over 4 decades, the case of Johnny has generated countless leads and hypotheses, but none have conclusively answered the question of who took Johnny and why. His mother continues to believe that he may be alive somewhere, living in secrecy.
Off the damn planet.
This case takes place in Sydney, Australia, on the 2nd of February.
You know what I'm saying? You just disappeared and that was it. That shit fucked up, dog. You don't know what the hell happened to that motherfucker. Right. You know what I'm saying? Imagine that type of shit. Everybody trying to find them. The community gathering up, trying to search.
You don't know if he's dead or anything. You don't know nothing for real, basically.
Nah, they
you getting clues and all of this shit, but you still don't know if, like, exactly where he at.
Then they
exactly
get tired
who got him.
And then they get tired of trying to search for that motherfucker and call it quits. That's it. They give it up. It was a cold fucking case. That shit crazy, man.
That's the end of that video, man. Y'all like, comment, share, subscribe, download all that shit, man. RizzoLu was in the building. I'm out this motherfucker.